Welcome back to part two of the Real Estate Commission and some of the licensing requirements. And if you haven't already done part one, highly recommend you take a look at that video first. But as we said in part one, in this module dealing with the Real Estate Commission and the licensing requirements, you're going to get a total of 9 questions on the state exam. On the state-specific portion of it. And again, the state being South Carolina, state-specific. Now, remember there are 35 total questions on the state portion. And again, 9 of those 35 are coming right out of this module. Again, I broke out into parts, probably be about 4 parts, I'm guessing. But again, just trying to keep the videos a little bit smaller. So let's continue on. When it comes to investigating, obviously the Real Estate Commission has that authority to investigate when they feel like real estate agents have violated the law, or quite frankly, it's when they do investigations, it's a result of somebody filing a complaint. That's usually how you get caught. But here's what you need to know, at least concerning investigations. The investigator has to have at least 100 hours of training. They got to go through 100 hours of training. Now, just to be clear, the 100 hours of training is they're not training someone on how to investigate. Obviously, whoever they hire to do the investigation, these are professional investigators. They already know how to investigate. But what they may not know is what the real estate license laws are, okay? So they have to sit through 100 hours of training just on real estate law. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to investigate something if you don't know what the requirements are, right? So that's what the training is all about. In paragraph B, you notice it says the Real Estate Commission can issue restraining orders. I'd pay attention to that one. In fact, I know they like to ask about this. And it's usually a question along the lines of which of the following actions can the Real Estate Commission take, or something along those lines. And the answer they're probably going to be looking for is issue restraining orders. They can do that, and they will do that. And the reason they might do something like that, when you find out or hear that you're being investigated, over a particular transaction you were involved with, can't you see where at least some people, when they get that word, might feel tempted to talk to other people involved with the transaction, and maybe even just come right out and say, hey, look, they're investigating this transaction. We need to get together so we can get our story straight before they come out asking questions. Well, they're not going to allow that. In fact, I can assure you, before you even hear about an investigation, they will already put these restraining orders in place, basically preventing you from having any kind of communication with anybody involved with that transaction. So these restraining orders are a big deal, and they use them a lot, and obviously that is certainly something the Real Estate Commission can do. In paragraph C, here's just saying that the investigator must conclude their investigation within 150 days. And I think that's around 5 months. That's a long time to do an investigation. But then once they're finished with their investigation, then it says they will have to render a decision within 90 days. Well, what kind of decision? Well, are they going to prosecute? Do they feel like they have a case against you or not? And again, that's what they've got to decide. At least me personally, that's 90 days. That's another 3 months. Seems like an awful long time to figure out whether you got enough evidence to charge somebody with something, but that's what it is. So they got 150 days to do the investigation. Then they have another 90 days to determine if they're going to charge, prosecute, what are they going to do. Then paragraph D is just saying that, as the licensee, if you know you've done something you shouldn't have, it says you could just voluntarily surrender your license. Just say, you know what? I made a mistake. I did it. And so basically what you're doing by surrendering your license is you're foregoing the investigation. So they don't have to investigate. You're basically just pleading whatever or surrendering your license and so forth. That might sound kind of, some people might say, well, I wouldn't just surrender my license. I'd see what they find. Well, I will just say this. Now, actually, before I say what I was about to say, you probably, if you're having to go through an investigation of any kind, obviously right now we're talking about real estate stuff, but you probably need to consult with an attorney before you sit down talking to investigators and whatnot. Okay, there's my legal advice, and I'm not an attorney. So when I say legal advice, I can't give legal advice, not trying to give legal advice, but just a suggestion. Before you sit down with an investigator, you might want to speak to an attorney about what's going on here. Now, having said that, in my mind, if you did whatever they're alleging you did, you might want to just come clean. Okay? I'm thinking you probably don't want to force the investigation to take place if you did what they're alleging you did, whatever that is. And and you're going to see here in a little bit why I'm saying that. Now look, if you didn't do anything wrong, then let them do whatever they got to do. That's the way I feel about it. But otherwise, if you did something wrong, you probably need to come clean. They probably have information that you don't know about. There's a reason they're asking you about it, right? Okay. But then in paragraph E here, we look at what are the disciplinary actions if you have violated the license law. I promise you this will be a question on the exam. But you could receive a fine of not less than $500 or more than $5,000 per violation. And it's that per violation that might pique your interest there, because typically when they start investigating, they don't just stop. They tend to find a lot of things wrong. But anyway, for test purposes, I'd make sure I remember. I'd make sure I remember. They can fine you anywhere between $500 and $5,000 per violation. I would remember that. But you remember earlier, just a moment ago, I said you might want to just fess up if you did what they're alleging, right? Now, whether that requires surrendering your license or not, that's something you'll certainly be able to discuss or negotiate with the commission. But if you force that investigation to go through, if they do the investigation, and assuming they determine that you were guilty of whatever they were alleging, if you look at that next bullet, that should get your attention. The Real Estate Commission may recover the cost of the investigation. I promise you that fine is probably going to sound pretty cheap compared to what the cost of the investigation would be. Because you remember that you got potentially up to 5 months of an investigator on the job, and then another 3 months on top of that to try to render a decision on what to do. Okay? So, you could have several months, anywhere from 5 to 8 months worth of expenses for an investigator. So, I'd just be, if it were me, I would not want the investigation to take place if I know I did something I shouldn't have done. Okay? But again, that's something you and your attorney, if something like that should happen, you and your attorney can discuss it. And, and then it says you can enter into a consent order. That kind of goes back to just surrendering your license. You're not pleading guilty, but you're not pleading innocent neither. You're just saying, here's my license, let me go. So anyway, those are your disciplinary actions. But y'all, then the next thing we need to take a look at are what are the activities that require a license? I guarantee you're going to get a question out of this one. In fact, the question will probably be, which of the following activities require a real estate license to do? Well, there are 5 things the law has identified requires a real estate license. Number 1, if you're negotiating listing, sales, purchase, or lease of real estate, you must have a real estate license to do any of that. Listing, sale, purchase, or lease. Number 2, if you're auctioning real estate, you better have a real estate license. Obviously, they're talking about auctioneers. So in this case, an auctioneer must have an auctioneer's license. But if you're going to be auctioning real estate, then you must also have a real estate license. I know a lot of auctioneers around the state. In fact, I speak to them at their convention annually, pretty much every year, and great bunch of people. But I will tell you, not many of them very happy about having to have an auctioneer's license and a real estate license to auction real estate, but it is what it is. So there you go. Number 3, if you're going to be soliciting referrals, y'all are talking about you cannot pay someone a referral fee and you cannot receive referral fees over real estate if you're not licensed. So when we talk about referrals, which we kind of touched on that a little bit back in part 1, but y'all, the party that's doing the referring must have an active real estate license, and the party receiving the referral must have an active license. Y'all, if you're both, if you're not licensed, either one of you, both of you are going to get in trouble over this referral fee stuff. And I will tell you, you ain't gonna like the penalty for that, and we'll be talking about that coming up. Number 4, you cannot provide advice and or opinions about real estate if you're not licensed. I have people when I'm actually in classroom, they'll say, how can the law say I can't have an opinion without having to have a license? Obviously what they're talking about here, you can't charge for that opinion, okay, or for advice, unless you have a real estate license. If you're licensed, then you can offer advice, opinions, suggestions, whatever, and charge for that service. If you're not licensed, you can't do that. And then, number 5, you can't hold yourself out to the public as if you are an agent. You can't portray yourself as a real estate professional if you're not licensed to do that, okay? So those are the 5 activities you must have a real estate license to do, okay? Now, one of the things you'll find when it comes to law, it just seems like with every good law we have in this country, then they'll pass another law exempting people from having to comply with the law. And this one is no different. So now we look at what are the exemptions. In other words, who can practice real estate, do those 5 things without a license? Well, there are 5 exemptions, and again, you better be familiar with them. Make sure you know who's exempt. But number 1, obviously, if you're selling or leasing property by owner, then you do not have to have a real estate license. Obviously, can you sell your own house for sale by owner and not be licensed? Yes, you can. But y'all was talking about leases here as well. Can you manage your own investment properties without a license? You can, but you better own those properties. If you get caught managing properties and you don't own them, you're not on the deed, that's illegal. In fact, I'm gonna tell you, here's a very common problem where you have like a husband and wife, and maybe the husband owns the properties, but the wife is managing them. Can't do that. Wife, if you're not on the deed, if you're not an owner, then you can't manage this property, okay? So anyway, that's number one. Number two, attorneys at law. Y'all, they're exempt. Yeah, I got some thoughts on that, but y'all, it's kind of interesting. Y'all, who's in the y'all when who makes up the legislature that writes these laws? Attorneys. And it's kind of interesting that they tend to exempt themselves on a lot of the laws that they seem to pass, but hey, it is what it is. State and federal agencies, y'all, the government is exempt. Y'all, they can take property, sell property, they can do whatever they want to do, and they don't have to have a license. But number four probably is the one that gets me out of all of them. Registered foresters are exempt, as long as the sale of land is incidental to the sale of timber. I'm sorry. Yeah. What does that mean? So what they're saying is this. If I'm a registered forester, all I'm selling are the trees, the timber on this property. That's all I'm selling. But basically, because you're going to be cutting these trees down, then that's going to render the value of the land worthless. So we're just throwing the land in with it, with the trees. Y'all, that's a little bit nonsense to me anyway, but hey, I guess registered foresters, they have their lobbyists just like other professions, but they're exempt. Number five, court-appointed receivers and trustees are exempt. Y'all, like a personal representative. If you have a family member or a friend or somebody pass away, and maybe you're the one that was designated in the will to be their personal representative, and we have to start selling, maybe they have a house that needs to be sold, the courts will tell the personal representative to sell the property. Well, as long as you're acting in the capacity of a personal representative, then you do not have to have a real estate license, even though it's not your personal property that you're selling. So those are the five exemptions. So make sure you know the five activities that require a license, and then obviously you better know the five that are also exempt from having to have a license as well. But then we look at what the penalties are if you get caught practicing without a license. And I kind of mentioned this just a moment ago. But you better not get caught practicing, meaning managing or selling property that you do not own. Meaning, if your name's not on the deed, then you don't own it. But if you get caught practicing without a license, then that's considered a misdemeanor. And upon conviction, says you must be fined not more than $500 or imprisoned for up to 6 months or both. That imprisonment gets my attention. I would think it would be for you as well. But here's what I want you to be very careful with here for test purposes. Because I'm telling you, this has caused a lot of problems for people on the exam. A little bit earlier, we talked about what the penalties were for a licensed agent if they get caught violating the license law. Remember, if you are licensed, but you break the law, then the penalty, remember the fine is anywhere from $500 to $5,000 per violation. Here, they're talking about someone that is not licensed, but gets caught practicing real estate. Y'all, this is a different penalty. Here, you got a fine not to exceed $500, but it also carries a potential 6 months in prison or both. Okay? Y'all, don't confuse those penalties on the exam. So pay attention in the question. Y'all, make sure you understand. Y'all, are they saying that this is a licensed real estate agent that violated the law? Or are they talking about somebody that is not licensed at all, but yet they're out there doing things that require a license to do? Okay? Again, depending on which one they're asking you about, I'm telling you, the answers should be different. So y'all don't get these confused, and it's easy to do that on the exam. But then this last bullet here, what they're talking about here, well, first of all, it says licensees allowing their license to lapse or cancel and continues to practice will face the penalties listed above. Here's what they're talking about. We're going to talk more about this here in a little bit later, actually in a different chapter. But anyway, when you get your license, to retain or keep your license, you will have to renew the license every 2 years by June 30th. So every 2 years by June 30th, you have to renew your license. Again, we'll be talking more about that and requirements and so forth a little bit later. But if you forget to renew your license and June 30th rolls around, or actually say July 1st rolls around and you forgot to renew your license, then you're no longer licensed come July 1st. Your license is now considered lapsed, because you didn't get it renewed. And that's what it's talking about in this last bullet. If you forget to renew your license, come midnight June 30th, it's now considered lapsed. And you continue practicing real estate, maybe you go to a closing or whatever, but you didn't renew your license, now you're subject to, again, the $500 fine or 6 months in prison. And again, this is where they're going to cause you the problems on the exam. They may emphasize in the question that you got a licensed real estate agent. They will put emphasis on the fact they are licensed, but failed to renew their license by June 30th and attended closing on July 1st or something like that. What would be the penalty if that happens? Well, obviously, they're trying to put a lot of emphasis on the fact that they were licensed so that you would go with the fine of $500 up to $5,000. But the problem is when they violated the law, they were not licensed, right? Because their license lapsed midnight June 3rd. That means you're no longer licensed. And anything you do July 1st or after, and you still haven't renewed, that means you're now practicing without a license. So the penalty in that case would be the $500 or up to 6 months in jail or both. So again, you got to pay attention, read these questions good, because that's how they're going to try to trick you. Or people say, well, that's a trick question. And a lot of times it wasn't a trick question, you just didn't read the question, right? So you don't get in too big a hurry. Take your time on the exam. Read through it, make sure you understand exactly what they're asking, then you shouldn't have a problem. All right, well, that's part 2. Hopefully that was helpful to you. And again, shine for Jesus.